The night my parents told me I was no longer part of the plan. They said it over pot roast, like they were discussing weather. I remember the sound of my mother's fork scraping the plate before the words landed. Not loud, not dramatic, just careless. Like she hadn't realized a sentence could end a life you thought you still had. "You're not named in the will anymore, Mara," she said. "We assumed you'd understand. My name is Mara Ellison." I was 31 years old, sitting at my parents' dining table in Cedar Falls, Iowa, on a quiet Sunday evening in early November. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just a calm announcement delivered between bites. I didn't respond right away. I kept chewing. That's something I learned early in my family. Silence bought you time. Emotion cost you leverage. My father, Howard, didn't look at me. He stared into his mashed potatoes like they might explain themselves if he waited long enough. My younger sister, Bethany, froze mid-sip of wine. My brother-in-law, Lucas, shifted in his chair. He always shifted when money was involved. It was his tell. "We thought it was best," my mother continued, still not looking at me, "given everything. The word families use when they don't want to list the charges." I swallowed. What exactly disqualified me? Bethany laughed softly, a nervous sound. "Mom, maybe this isn't the time." "It is the time," my mother said. Mara asked. Howard cleared his throat. "You've been inconsistent," he said. "No spouse, no children, no roots here anymore. You live in Chicago now. We don't even know what you do half the time." "I work in compliance consulting," I said. "You know that." "You change titles every year," Bethany said. "It's confusing." I nodded. That part was true. I changed titles because my clients asked me not to advertise what I actually did. But explaining that would only make it worse. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on the table. "It's not personal," he said, already smiling the way men smile when they're about to benefit. "It's just about protecting the family business." There it was, the real sentence, the one they'd been circling. Ellison Hardware wasn't glamorous. One main location, 2 warehouses, a handful of long-term commercial accounts. But the land it sat on had tripled in value, and my grandmother had been very specific about how it should be handled. Or so I thought. "You're worried I'd sell," I said. "We're worried you'd complicate things," my mother corrected. "Bethany and Lucas are expanding. They need clarity." Bethany reached for Lucas's hand. He squeezed back, performative. They'd been married 18 months. He'd been helping with operations since month 3. I looked at my plate. The pot roast tasted like dust. "So I'm excluded," I said. Howard finally looked up. "It's temporary." I met his eyes. Wills aren't temporary. No one answered. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't a reaction. It was a decision made months ago. Probably at a dinner I hadn't been invited to. Probably framed as necessary. Probably signed with smiles. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask to see paperwork. I finished my meal. "I need to use the restroom," I said, standing. My mother nodded, relieved. She always preferred things neat. Emotional messes made her anxious. In the bathroom, I locked the door and leaned against the sink. My reflection looked calm. Too calm. That worried me more than anger would have. I'd spent my 20s learning how power actually moved in rooms. Quietly, through documents, through timing, through who signed what and when. This wasn't about inheritance. Not really. This was about control. When I came back, dessert was already on the table. Apple pie, my grandmother's recipe. I almost laughed. Bethany looked up. "You okay?" "Yes," I said. "I understand." The relief in the room was immediate. Lucas relaxed. My mother smiled. Howard exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. "I'm glad," my mother said. "We knew you'd be mature about it." Mature. Another word that meant compliant. I put on my coat 10 minutes later. No one stopped me. No one asked if I needed anything. They assumed I was done. At the door, I turned back. One question. Howard stiffened. Bethany tensed. "Grandma's trust," I said. "When was it amended?" Lucas answered too quickly. "Last spring." I nodded. "Who suggested the change?" A pause. Just long enough. "My mother," Bethany said. That was interesting. My grandmother had died 2 years ago. She'd been sharp until the end. Suspicious of lawyers. protective of me in a way she never was with Bethany. "Okay," I said. "Good night." The drive back to my hotel was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I needed the silence to settle into something usable. By the time I reached the interstate, I wasn't sad anymore. I was focused. I thought about the compliance audits I'd run for mid-sized family companies, about the quiet ways assets moved before anyone noticed, about how often temporary adjustments became permanent theft. I thought about the last voicemail my grandmother left me, the one I'd saved because she sounded tired. "Mara," she'd said, "if anyone ever tells you not to worry, that's when you should start paying attention." When I got to the hotel, I opened my laptop. I didn't look up the will. Not yet. Instead, I opened a folder labeled Ellison. Inside were old documents, things I'd kept without knowing why, a habit from my work. You never throw away originals. One file caught my eye. A scanned deed. My grandmother's handwriting in the margin. I zoomed in, and for the first time that night, my heart started to beat faster. Because the property Ellison Hardware sat on wasn't owned by the company. It never had been. And if that was still true, then my parents hadn't just excluded me. They'd made a much bigger mistake. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset, but because my brain had shifted into audit mode. There's a difference between emotional insomnia and professional insomnia. Emotional insomnia is loud. It replays conversations, tone, facial expressions. Professional insomnia is quiet. It's just pattern recognition, clicking into place, one detail at a time. At 2:17 a.m., sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, I opened my laptop again and pulled up the scanned deed. The document was dated 1998, the year my grandmother, Eleanor Ellison, had bought the land outright in her own name. Not through the company, not through a trust, just her. In the margin, next to the legal description of the parcel, she'd written in her slanted cursive, "Land stays separate. Business can rent." I remembered that fight. I'd been 14. My father had wanted to roll everything together for simplicity. Grandma had said simplicity was just another word for losing leverage. I scrolled further. There it was, a lease agreement. Ellison Hardware Incorporated as tenant. Eleanor Ellison as landlord. 99-year term, fixed annual rent, non-transferable without written consent from the landowner. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with clarity, because my grandmother's will didn't matter nearly as much as her living documents. And those didn't disappear when someone rewrote a will. I checked the trust amendment date Bethany had mentioned, last spring, 8 months before my grandmother died. Too late. Any changes to the trust after her diagnosis would be vulnerable, especially if they contradicted long-standing asset separation. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. They thought they'd cut me out of the future. What they'd actually done was show me exactly where the weak joints were. The next morning, I checked out early and drove back to Chicago. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text Bethany. Silence was still my strongest position. On Monday, I took the day off from client work. I told my assistant I had a personal matter. She didn't ask questions. People who work with me long enough learn when not to. I started with the county recorder's office. Everything was digital now, but I still liked pulling original filings. You see patterns in paperwork you don't see on screens. Eleanor Ellison was still listed as the landowner, which meant one thing. When she died, that property had to go somewhere. I pulled her probate file, and that's when I saw it. A separate memorandum, handwritten, filed but never referenced in the will. A transfer on death designation. Beneficiary, Mara Ellison. My name. I sat there for a full minute, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. My grandmother hadn't trusted the will either. She'd bypassed it. The land was mine. Not eventually, not conditionally. Already. Ellison Hardware had been operating on my land for 2 years without my knowledge, which meant every expansion Lucas had bragged about, every loan they'd secured, every projection they'd made to the bank, rested on an assumption that was no longer true. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I called a lawyer. Her name was Denise Harper. Late 40s, real estate litigation. Quiet voice, sharp questions. She didn't interrupt when I explained, She didn't rush me. When I finished, she said, "Do you want to negotiate or do you want to enforce?" "Explain the difference," I said. Negotiate means you tell them you own the land and offer revised lease terms. Enforce means you notify them they're in breach and start the clock. I looked out the window at the gray Chicago skyline. "How long have they been in breach?" 2 years, Denise said. They were required to update tenant disclosures upon the landowner's death. They didn't. Penalties? Significant. I closed my eyes. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "We assumed you'd understand." "I want to enforce," I said. There was a pause. Not hesitation, respect. "Okay," Denise said. "Then we do this cleanly." The notice went out Wednesday morning. Not to my parents directly. To Ellison Hardware's registered office. Certified mail. Legal language. Neutral tone. It stated that ownership of the land had transferred to me upon Eleanor Ellison's death, effective immediately. That the existing lease was now void due to failure to disclose material change. That the company had 30 days to vacate or renegotiate under new terms. I didn't CC my family. I let the letter do the talking. Bethany called me 3 hours later. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Mara, this is not funny. Call me back," Lucas emailed. Subject: urgent clarification needed. I didn't respond. That night, my father showed up at my apartment. I watched him through the peephole. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older. His shoulders were tense. I waited 30 seconds before opening the door. "Mara," he said, forcing a smile. "We need to talk." "Yes," I said. "We do." I didn't invite him in. He cleared his throat. "There's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't," I said. "You can't just threaten the company," he said. "That business feeds a lot of families." "So did my grandmother's land," I said. His jaw tightened. "You're being vindictive." I looked at him. Really looked. "No," I said. "I'm being accurate." He lowered his voice. "Your mother is very upset." "I'm sure," I said. "Mara," he said, softer now. "We're family." I nodded. "You removed me from the will." "That was business," he said quickly. "So is this," I replied. His eyes flicked past me, into the apartment. I knew what he was looking for. Evidence of struggle. Something to confirm I still needed them. He didn't find it. "I raised you better than this," he said. "No," I said quietly. "You raised me to understand contracts." He left 10 minutes later. That night, I slept. But the story wasn't over. Because the bank Lucas had secured expansion financing through hadn't been informed either, and they were about to find out. The bank called me before my family did. That surprised me more than it should have. Thursday morning, 9:12 a.m. My phone lit up with an unfamiliar number from Cedar Falls. I let it ring twice before answering. "Ms. Ellison?" a man asked. His voice was polite, controlled, the kind of voice that's trained to sound calm when something is already on fire. "This is Mara Ellison. My name is Thomas Riley. I'm with Prairie Ridge Commercial Lending. We've received a notice regarding property ownership tied to one of our outstanding loans." I leaned back in my chair. "Yes." There was a pause. "We'd like to confirm the accuracy of that notice." "You're welcome to," I said. "Everything is on file with the county." Another pause. Longer this time. "The borrower," he continued carefully, "represented that the property was owned by Ellison Hardware Incorporated. Then the borrower misrepresented material facts," I said. Silence. "That would trigger a review," he said. "It should," I replied. He cleared his throat. "Are you seeking immediate enforcement?" "I've already served notice," I said. "I'm open to renegotiation within the 30-day window." There it was, the opening. The bank now understood what my family didn't. This wasn't emotional leverage. It was structural. "I'll need to escalate this internally," Riley said. "Thank you for your time." "You're welcome," I said, and ended the call. 10 minutes later, Bethany called again. I answered this time. "What are you doing?" she demanded, skipping hello. "I'm correcting an error," I said. "You're blowing up our lives," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "Do you have any idea what Lucas is dealing with right now?" I pictured Lucas pacing, phone pressed to his ear, charm failing him for the first time in years. "I imagine it's uncomfortable," I said. "You can't do this," she said. "Dad built that company." "On Grandma's land," I replied. "That doesn't matter," she snapped. She wanted the business to stay in the family. "She wanted the land protected," I said. Those aren't the same thing. Bethany went quiet. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. "What do you want?" she asked. That was the right question, and it told me everything. "I want what's mine," I said. "And I want to be left out of decisions that use me as a safety net." "You were never a safety net," she said weakly. I didn't argue. "Bethany," I said, "you removed me from the will without telling me." "That was Mom's idea," she said quickly. She thought. "I don't care whose idea it was," I said. "I care that it happened." She exhaled sharply. "We can fix this." I closed my eyes. "You already did, by showing me where I stand." She hung up on me. By Friday afternoon, the ripple effects were visible. Prairie Ridge issued a notice of covenant review. Ellison Hardware's line of credit was frozen, pending clarification of asset backing. A supplier called to verify payment terms. Another delayed shipment. I didn't cause chaos. I revealed it. My mother came next. She didn't call. She sent a handwritten letter. I recognized her stationery immediately. Cream paper, embossed initials. She only used it when she wanted to sound sincere. "Mara," the letter began, "I don't understand why you're doing this. We always assumed you were independent by choice. We didn't realize you were keeping score." I stopped reading there. I folded the letter and set it aside. I'd learned the hard way that letters like that were written to absolve the sender, not reach the recipient. That evening, Denise called me. "They're scrambling," she said. "Your brother-in-law is asking for a meeting." "Through you?" I asked. "Yes." "Good," I said. We scheduled it for the following Tuesday. Neutral location, conference room, no family home turf. When Tuesday came, I arrived 10 minutes early. Lucas walked in late. He looked tired, not just stressed, stripped. Like the performance had finally collapsed under its own weight. "Mara," he said, forcing warmth. "Thanks for meeting." I nodded. "You brought counsel?" He gestured to the man behind him. "Evan Clark, corporate." Denise was already seated beside me. She didn't smile. They launched into it immediately. Lucas talked about misunderstanding, about legacy, about unity, about how this could have been handled internally. Denise let him talk. When he finished, she slid a document across the table. "Proposed lease terms," she said. "Market rate, short term, renewal contingent on compliance." Lucas stared at it. "This rate is triple what we were paying." "That's market," Denise said. "You were paying a legacy rate set by Eleanor Ellison." Lucas looked at me. "You'd do this to your own family?" I met his gaze. "You did it to me first." His mouth tightened. "You don't need the money." "That's not the point," I said. "What is the point?" he asked, voice rising. I leaned forward slightly. "The point is that I don't exist to stabilize decisions I wasn't allowed to make." He looked at me like I'd slapped him. "What happens if we can't agree?" he asked. Denise answered. "Vacate or face enforcement." Lucas slumped back in his chair. That was when he said the thing that changed everything. "You know," he said bitterly, "your parents always said you'd come around once you realized you couldn't make it on your own." The room went very still. I didn't respond immediately. I let the words sit there, exposed. "I made it," I said finally. "Without you, without them, that's what you couldn't stand." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think you've won." "I think I'm done," I said. The meeting ended without agreement. 2 days later, I received another call from Prairie Ridge. They were accelerating their review because Lucas had used projected land equity as collateral. Equity he didn't own. That wasn't just a mistake. That was fraud. And I hadn't even decided what to do with that information yet. Fraud is a quiet word. It doesn't sound like what it actually does. It sounds technical, accidental, like something that can be fixed with an apology and a revised spreadsheet. But when a bank uses that word, even tentatively, it changes the gravity in the room. Prairie Ridge didn't accuse Lucas outright. Not yet. They said inconsistencies. They said material discrepancies. They said, "We need clarification before proceeding." But Denise didn't sugarcoat it when she called me that evening. If they knowingly pledged equity they didn't control, she said, that's not a compliance issue. That's exposure. "To whom?" I asked. "To everyone," she said. "The bank, the suppliers, and, depending on how aggressive the lenders get, potentially the state." I stood in my kitchen, staring at the window. Chicago was gray that day, the kind of flat, low sky that made everything feel closer to the ground. I didn't report anything, I said. You didn't have to, Denise replied. You corrected the record. That's enough. That night, my parents held an emergency family meeting. I know this because Bethany texted me, by mistake. It wasn't meant for me. It was meant for Lucas. They're freaking out. Dad says you're trying to destroy us. Mom keeps crying. What are we going to do? She followed it with another message 10 seconds later. Please don't show this to anyone. I didn't respond. I set the phone down and sat at the table, hands folded, breathing slowly. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned off, replaced by something colder and steadier. Resolve. The next morning, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject: Family Resolution Proposal. It was from my father. He hadn't used my name. He hadn't said hello. The email was 3 paragraphs long and carefully worded, like something drafted with legal advice, but emotional intent. He acknowledged that mistakes may have been made. He emphasized stress. He emphasized family unity. He proposed mediation, neutral ground, a chance to repair trust. He ended with, "You don't want this to define us." I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Denise. Her reply was immediate. "Do not meet without terms." I agreed. I sent a single sentence back to my father. Any discussion should go through counsel. His response came an hour later. That feels unnecessary. I didn't answer. By Friday, the consequences started landing where my family couldn't ignore them. Prairie Ridge issued a formal notice of default review. Not foreclosure. Not yet. But enough to make vendors nervous. A longtime supplier requested advance payment. Another quietly canceled a contract extension. Lucas called me at 11:43 p.m. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. His voice didn't sound like itself. It was tight, rushed. "Mara, listen. We need to talk. This is spiraling. Dad's health isn't great. Mom's barely sleeping. You've made your point. Please." I deleted it. Saturday morning, my mother showed up at my building. I wasn't surprised. She'd always preferred face-to-face when she wanted to regain control. The concierge called up. "Ms. Ellison, there's a woman here asking for you." I closed my eyes. "Send her up." She stood in my living room, like a guest in a museum. Hands folded, eyes scanning. Not for mess, for clues. "You look well," she said. "So do you," I replied. She sat, without being invited. "This has gone too far," she said. No preamble, no warmth. I sat across from her. "You excluded me from the will," I said, "without telling me." "That wasn't meant to hurt you," she said quickly. "It was practical." "For whom?" "For the family," she said. I waited. She sighed. "You're different, Mara. You always have been. You don't need us the way Bethany does." There it was, the quiet truth. "You don't mean need," I said. "You mean comply." She flinched. "We just wanted stability," she said. "Lucas has vision. He has ambition," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." She leaned forward. "You could fix this. All of it. You could transfer the land into the company. Or into the trust. No one needs to know." I stared at her. "You're asking me to hide ownership to protect a lie," I said. "I'm asking you to be a daughter," she snapped. I didn't raise my voice. "You stopped treating me like one when you decided my value depended on how useful I was." Her eyes filled with tears. Real ones, this time. "You don't understand what this is doing to us," she said. I stood. "You're right," I said. "I don't. Because no one checked what it did to me." She stood too. For a moment, it looked like she might reach for me. Then she dropped her hands. "You'll regret this," she said softly. "I already regretted being silent," I replied. "This is just the correction." She left without another word. On Sunday night, Denise called again. "They're asking for an extension," she said. "The bank wants assurance. They're offering personal guarantees." "From whom?" I asked. "Your father, Lucas." I considered it. Personal guarantees meant panic. It meant they were running out of room. "I'm open to revised lease terms," I said. "Nothing else." Denise paused. "You know this could break the company." "Yes," I said. "Or it could force it to operate honestly." Monday morning, I received a message I hadn't expected from my grandmother's old attorney. He'd retired, but his assistant forwarded a note. "Found something you should see," it read. Attached was a scanned letter, dated 2 weeks before my grandmother died, addressed to him. It was short. If they try to cut Mara out, she gets the land. No exceptions. She sees clearly. They don't. I sat back in my chair. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd ignored her. And now the clock was running, because the 30-day notice was almost halfway through, and my family was about to learn the difference between assuming control and actually having it. The first thing my family lost wasn't money. It was certainty. Once Prairie Ridge flagged Ellison Hardware for review, everything slowed. Payments took longer to clear. Phone calls didn't get returned as quickly. People who used to say, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out," started saying, "We'll need that in writing." That shift is subtle, but fatal. By Wednesday of that week, Lucas had stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. His emails became clipped, defensive, full of phrases like best efforts and extenuating circumstances. My father, on the other hand, reverted to nostalgia. He sent me photos, old ones. Me on his shoulders at a 4th of July parade. Me holding a ribbon at the grand opening of the second warehouse. Me and Bethany on the steps of the old house, arms around each other, before marriage and money rearranged the hierarchy. No captions, just images. I didn't respond. Denise warned me that emotional outreach was often a prelude to procedural pressure. She was right. 2 days later, I received formal notice that Ellison Hardware intended to contest the transfer on death designation. They weren't denying its existence. They were challenging capacity. They were implying my grandmother hadn't been of sound mind when she signed it. I read the filing twice, my jaw tight. That wasn't business. That was erasure. I called Denise immediately. "They're attacking her," I said. Denise was quiet for a moment. "That's a dangerous strategy for them. They're desperate," I said. "And wrong," she replied. "We have medical records, independent witnesses, her attorney. This will not go the way they think." I hung up and sat at my desk, hands flat on the surface, breathing slowly. They were willing to rewrite her memory to avoid facing their own choices. I didn't feel hurt. I felt finished. That afternoon, Bethany came to my office. She didn't call ahead. She didn't text. She just showed up at the front desk, eyes red, coat half buttoned. The receptionist buzzed me. "Ms. Ellison, there's a woman here asking for you. She says she's your sister." I hesitated. Then I said, "Send her in." Bethany looked smaller than she had in months. Not physically, emotionally. Like the scaffolding that had held her up was cracking. She sat across from me, twisting her hands. "They're saying Grandma wasn't well," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "That's not true," she said quickly. "You know that, right?" "I do," I said. She swallowed. "Then why are they doing this?" I looked at her. "Because they believe admitting they were wrong would cost them more than lying." She shook her head. "This isn't who we are." I didn't say anything. "Mara," she whispered, "I never wanted you cut out. I just didn't stop it." I watched her closely. The phrasing mattered. "I didn't stop it," she repeated. "Not I opposed it. Not I fought for you. Just, I didn't stop it." "That's the difference," I said. Her eyes filled. "What do you want from me?" The question was raw, honest. "I want you to tell the truth," I said, "even if it's inconvenient." She nodded slowly. "They're going to lose everything," she said. "Only what they built on something that wasn't theirs," I replied. She flinched. Before she left, she asked one last question. "If you win," she said, "what happens to us?" I considered it. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know what won't happen." "What?" "I won't disappear to make you comfortable." She nodded, wiped her face, and left. That night, Denise called again. "They've escalated," she said. "They're requesting an injunction to delay enforcement." "On what grounds?" I asked. "Hardship," she said. "They're claiming immediate enforcement would cause irreparable harm." I laughed once. Short. No humor in it. "Did they mention me at all?" I asked. "No," Denise said. "You're a footnote." I thought about my grandmother's letter. She sees clearly. They don't. "Proceed," I said. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. It would be the first time my family and I stood on opposite sides of a courtroom, not arguing, not pleading, just presenting facts. And facts don't care who raised you. Courtrooms are designed to strip emotion out of stories. Wood, flags, neutral walls. Everyone dressed like they're trying not to exist. It's where chaos gets flattened into exhibits and timelines. That's why I like them. They don't reward volume. They reward preparation. The injunction hearing was set for 9 a.m. on Monday in the county courthouse. I arrived at 8:32, sat in the second row, and opened my folder. Denise sat beside me, calm, unreadable. Across the aisle, my family gathered, like a separate species. My father looked older than he had a week earlier. His suit hung a little loose, like it belonged to someone else. My mother clutched her purse with both hands, knuckles white. Bethany sat between them, eyes fixed on the floor. Lucas sat one row behind, jaw clenched, staring straight ahead. He didn't look at me. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed his approval, but because it confirmed something I hadn't wanted to admit. He'd never seen me as family. I was infrastructure. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The room settled. Ellison Hardware's attorney spoke first. He was polished, confident, and careful to sound sympathetic. He talked about hardship, about legacy, about jobs at risk, about a misunderstanding between siblings that had escalated unnecessarily. He never said my name. When he addressed the land ownership, he framed it as a technicality, an oversight, a paperwork issue that could be resolved once emotions cooled. Then Denise stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture. She simply placed one document after another into the record. The deed, the lease, the transfer on death designation, the medical affidavit from my grandmother's physician, the notarized witness statements, and finally, the letter. The judge read in silence. I watched my parents' faces as the realization set in. Not panic, not grief, recognition. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan that had failed. Denise finished with one sentence. My client is not causing harm. She is declining to continue subsidizing a structure built on omission. The judge adjusted her glasses. The request for injunction is denied, she said. Ownership is clear. Enforcement may proceed. The gavel came down softly. That was it. No speech, no drama, just confirmation. Outside the courtroom, my mother reached me first. Mara, she said, voice trembling. Please, this has gone too far. I looked at her. For the first time, I didn't feel pulled. This went too far when you decided I didn't deserve to know what you were doing, I said. My father stepped forward. We can still fix this. I shook my head. You're still trying to fix the outcome, not the behavior. Lucas finally spoke. You wanted to punish us, he said. Congratulations. I met his eyes. No, I wanted to stop being used. Bethany said nothing. She just watched, face pale, like she was seeing the cost of neutrality for the first time. I walked away. The next 2 weeks were procedural, formal notices, compliance deadlines, revised lease proposals sent and rejected. The company scrambled to find alternate locations. Nothing suitable appeared quickly enough. The warehouse was the problem. Custom loading bays, zoning approvals, access roads, things you don't replace in 30 days. On day 28, Denise called. They're asking for a short-term extension, she said. 3 months. On what terms? I asked. Reduced rent. No back pay. I exhaled slowly. No, I said. Okay, she replied. Then they'll have to vacate. On day 30, Ellison Hardware shut its doors temporarily. Employees were furloughed. Vendors pulled back. The bank froze all non-essential accounts. My parents called it sabotage. The bank called it risk management. I called it inevitable. I didn't attend the final walkthrough. I didn't need to. I'd already decided what to do with the property. 3 weeks later, I signed a development agreement, not with my family, with a regional logistics firm that needed warehouse space and was willing to pay market rate. They offered long-term stability, clean contracts, no emotional baggage. When the wire cleared, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the confirmation email. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. Bethany called that night. They're selling the house, she said. I know, I replied. They blame you. I know, I said again. She hesitated. Do you blame them? I thought about it. No, I said. I just stopped absorbing it. There was silence on the line. I don't know how to be in the middle anymore, she said quietly. You don't have to, I replied. You just have to choose. After we hung up, I poured a glass of water and stood by the window. The city lights blinked on. one by one. I thought about how long I'd mistaken endurance for love. How often I'd accepted exclusion because it was quieter than confrontation. They hadn't lost a daughter. They'd lost access. And that was the difference they'd never understood. The silence, after everything collapsed, was the strangest part. No calls, no emails, no late-night voicemails pretending to be calm. It was like my family had collectively decided that if they didn't acknowledge what happened, it might stop being real. I knew that silence. I'd grown up in it. It was the same silence that followed arguments that were never resolved. The same silence that replaced apologies. The same silence that taught me, early on, that discomfort was something you waited out, not addressed. 3 weeks after Ellison Hardware shut down operations, I ran into someone from Cedar Falls, by accident. I was in line at a coffee shop near my office when a woman behind me said my name. Mara Ellison? I turned. She looked familiar in that small-town way, where faces blur together over years of polite proximity. Angela Porter, she said. Accounting. I used to handle payroll for your dad. I nodded. Hi, Angela. She hesitated, then smiled awkwardly. I didn't know if I should say hello. You can, I said. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About everything. For what? I asked. She glanced around, then back at me. The way they talked about you. After you left. That tightened something in my chest. What did they say? I asked. Angela pressed her lips together. That you abandoned the family. That you'd always been cold. That you cared more about money than people. I let out a breath. That tracks. She shook her head. It didn't sit right with me, especially after what I saw. What did you see? She looked uncomfortable. Lucas started pulling old files, backdating approvals, trying to make it look like the land issue had been handled years ago. My stomach dropped. Not in shock, but in confirmation. He asked me to adjust entries, she continued. I refused. That's when he let me go. When was this? I asked. 2 days after the injunction hearing, she said. I nodded slowly. That's why I wanted to say something, Angela said. People think this was about greed, but it wasn't. It was about control. And when they lost it, they panicked. I thanked her. She left with a small, sad smile. I stood there, holding my coffee, untouched, realizing something important. This wasn't over. Not legally. Not emotionally. Because people who believe they've been wronged by the truth don't move on quietly. They look for another angle, another narrative, another way to win. And my family had always been good at narratives. 2 days later, Denise forwarded me a local news article. Headline: Family dispute shuts down long-standing local business. I read it once. Then again. It quoted my father. It quoted Lucas. It quoted a family friend. They talked about betrayal, about internal conflict, about a daughter who turned her back on tradition. I was mentioned, once, referred to as an estranged sibling. No mention of the land, no mention of the lease, no mention of the fraud, just emotion, just implication. Denise called an hour later. They're shaping public opinion, she said. I expected that, I replied. You could respond, she said. Issue a statement. No, I said. That feeds it. She paused. Then what do you want to do? I thought about Angela, about backdated files, about desperation. I want the facts on record, I said, quietly. Denise understood immediately. Within a week, Prairie Ridge completed its internal review. The findings weren't public, but they were decisive. Ellison Hardware was flagged for misrepresentation. Their credit was revoked. Their file was marked high risk. Lucas's name appeared on a list he didn't want to be on. Not criminal. Not yet. But radioactive. The logistics firm finalized their development plans for the property. Construction crews were scheduled. Permits filed. Signs posted. For the first time since my grandmother died, the land wasn't a battleground. It was productive. My mother called me that Sunday. I almost didn't answer. But something told me this call was different. Mara, she said. Her voice sounded smaller. Your father's in the hospital. I closed my eyes. What happened? Stress, she said. Chest pain. They're running tests. I didn't feel panic. I felt weight. I'm sorry, I said. There was a pause. Are you coming? I thought about it. I don't know, I said honestly. She sighed. He keeps asking for you. That landed differently than she intended. "I'll think about it," I said. After we hung up, I sat on the couch, staring at nothing. This was the moment families like mine relied on. The moment illness softened boundaries. The moment you were expected to fold, to return to your assigned role. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted clarity. I went to the hospital the next day, not as a daughter seeking approval, not as a problem to be solved, as myself. My father looked fragile in the hospital bed, smaller than I'd ever seen him. The man who'd always filled rooms now barely filled the space between the rails. He looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know," I replied. He swallowed. "I didn't think you'd go this far." "I didn't think you would either," I said. We sat in silence. "I was afraid," he said finally. "Afraid of losing what I built." "You lost it the moment you tried to build it on someone else's silence," I replied. Tears slid down his temples. He didn't wipe them away. "I thought you didn't need us," he whispered. "I needed honesty," I said. "You gave me conditions." He closed his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. I stood. "You don't," I said. "You live with it." When I left the hospital, I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. Because closure isn't reconciliation. Sometimes it's simply the moment you stop carrying what was never yours to hold. After the hospital visit, something in me went quiet. Not numb, not broken, just settled in a way I hadn't felt before. Like a muscle I'd been clenching my whole life, finally released. And I could feel the shape of myself without tension. I didn't hear from my parents for a week. That was new. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Denise called with a tone she rarely used. "Something just crossed my desk," she said. "And you should hear it from me first." I sat down. "What kind of something?" "Ellison Hardware filed for Chapter 11. I closed my eyes, not because I was shocked, because I knew what that meant for everyone involved. "They're attempting reorganization," Denise continued. "Lucas is listed as COO. Your father stepped down formally last Friday. So they're still trying," I said. "Yes," she replied. "But here's the part that concerns me." She paused. "They've named you." "In what way?" I asked. "They're alleging that your enforcement actions created undue hardship and contributed to insolvency." I let out a slow breath. "So they're blaming me?" "Yes," Denise said. "Indirectly. They're framing you as an external pressure." "Am I liable?" I asked. "No," she said immediately. "They're not accusing you of wrongdoing. This is about narrative. If they can position you as an aggressor, it helps them with creditors." I thought of the article, the interviews, the careful omissions. "They want me to respond," Denise added. "Or at least, prepare to." I stared at the wall, the afternoon light slanting across it. "Let them talk," I said. "But I want to protect the truth." "We can," she said, "but it won't be loud." That night, I reviewed the bankruptcy filing. It was thick, dense, full of words designed to make decisions feel inevitable rather than chosen. And then, I saw it. A line item. Related party obligation. Lease dispute pending resolution. They hadn't named me, but they hadn't removed me either. I was still there. A shadow. A problem they couldn't erase. 2 days later, Bethany asked to meet me. Her text was short. "Can we talk? Just us?" I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, halfway between our worlds. Neutral ground. No memories attached. She arrived early. I could tell because she'd already ordered tea she wasn't drinking. She looked tired. Not dramatic tired. Bone deep. "They're saying you'll destroy what's left if you don't help," she said as soon as I sat down. "I'm not doing anything," I replied. "That's what scares them," she said. I studied her face, the lines I'd never noticed before, the way she held her shoulders like she was bracing for impact. "What do you want, Bethany?" I asked. She swallowed. "I want you to know I didn't know how bad it had gotten." "That's not the same as not benefiting," I said gently. She nodded. "I know." We sat in silence. "They want you to sign a subordination agreement," she said finally. "Just temporarily, so the bank feels safer." I laughed once, quietly. "They want me to give up my position." "Yes," she admitted. "They think if you show goodwill, the judge will be more favorable." I leaned back. "They already had goodwill. They traded it for control." She looked at me, eyes glossy. "If you don't help, they'll lose everything." I tilted my head. "You mean everything they didn't build alone?" Her face crumpled. Why are you so calm? I thought about that. Because I stopped hoping they'd choose me, I said. Once that ended, clarity showed up. She wiped her eyes. They're scared of you now. That's not my responsibility, I replied. She nodded slowly. I don't know how to be their daughter without being your enemy. That's their design, I said, not yours. She left before finishing her tea. A week later, Denise called again. Lucas's attorney reached out, she said, off the record. What does he want? I asked. To meet, without your parents. I considered it. Why? I asked. Because the bankruptcy trustee is asking questions, she said. And Lucas is trying to reduce exposure. I closed my eyes. Set it up, I said. But I won't negotiate. The meeting took place in a bland office downtown. No windows, no warmth. Lucas looked different. Not frantic. Calculated. Mara, he said. Thanks for coming. I didn't come for you, I replied. I came to listen. He nodded. Fair. He slid a document across the table. We want to buy the land, he said. I didn't touch the paper. At what price? I asked. Below market, he admitted, given the circumstances. I smiled slightly. You're asking me to rescue you. I'm asking you to preserve what's left, he said. For whom? I asked. For the family, he said quickly. I leaned forward. You tried to rewrite Grandma's mind. You asked people to falsify records. You blamed me publicly. And now you want my help? He stared at me. You don't have to like me, he said, but you could end this. I already did, I said. You're just catching up. He sighed. If you don't sell, the trustee might force liquidation. That's not my problem, I said. He clenched his jaw. You really don't care. I stood. I care deeply. That's why I'm not participating in another lie. As I left, he said something that followed me out the door. You think this is over, he said. It's not. I paused. No, I said. It's just no longer mine. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming around me. I thought about how many years I'd spent being the quiet one, the reasonable one, the one who made things easier. I'd mistaken that for peace. What I had now wasn't peace yet, but it was honesty. And honesty, I was learning, has a sharp edge. The trustee called me on a Thursday morning. Not a lawyer, not an assistant. The trustee, his name was Alan Whitaker. Mid-50s, neutral tone. The kind of man who'd seen enough families tear themselves apart over spreadsheets that nothing surprised him anymore. Ms. Ellison, he said, I'm overseeing the Ellison Hardware Chapter 11 filing. Your name appears in several material disclosures. I'd like to ask a few clarifying questions. Of course, I said. This isn't adversarial, he added. I just need accuracy. Accuracy. I appreciated that word. He asked about the land, the lease, the transfer on death designation, whether I'd offered extensions, whether I'd interfered with operations. I answered calmly. Precisely. No emotion, no speculation. At the end, he paused. In your opinion, he said, was the company operating under the assumption that it controlled assets it did not? Yes, I said. And did you ever represent otherwise? No. Another pause. Thank you, he said. That's all I need for now. When the call ended, I sat still for a long moment. That conversation would ripple. Because trustees don't care about feelings. They care about whether numbers were real when promises were made. That afternoon, Denise emailed me. Trustee requested internal correspondence, she wrote, including emails related to the land, lease, and financing representations. I closed my eyes. They were about to be audited from the inside. The following week, the narrative started to crack. Not publicly. Quietly, a supplier withdrew a declaration supporting Ellison Hardware after reviewing documents. Prairie Ridge amended its position, clarifying that loan terms were issued based on incomplete information. Lucas's name appeared again, this time in a footnote. Officer representations subject to review. That's the phrase that changes careers. Bethany called me that night, voice shaking. They're saying Lucas might be personally liable, she said. I know, I replied. He's furious, she said. He says you orchestrated this. I closed my eyes. I corrected the record. He's blaming you for everything, she whispered. That's easier than blaming himself, I said. There was a long silence. Do you hate us? She asked. The question landed heavier than anything else. No, I said honestly. I just stopped protecting the story that hurt me. She sniffed. Mom says you've always been cold. I almost smiled. I've always been observant, I said. They just didn't like what I noticed. 2 days later, my mother sent me another letter. This one wasn't embossed. No special paper, just plain white. Mara, it read. I don't recognize our family anymore. Everything feels upside down. I don't know who to trust. I folded it slowly. She still hadn't asked what she'd done. That Sunday, I drove back to Cedar Falls for the first time since the hearing. Not to see them, to walk the land. The warehouse stood quiet, locked, fenced. A for lease sign already posted by the logistics firm. I parked on the gravel shoulder and got out of the car. The air smelled like dust and cold metal. The same smell from my childhood summers, when Grandma used to bring lemonade out to the workers and remind them to take breaks. I walked the perimeter slowly. This place had held so many unspoken assumptions. That ownership was inherited by proximity. That silence meant consent. That tradition excused exclusion. It didn't. As I stood there, my phone buzzed. A text from Denise. Trustee filing motion to convert to Chapter 7, liquidation. I leaned against the hood of my car and let the wind hit my face. This was the moment everyone warned you about. The point of no return. The one where you were supposed to step in, soften, rescue. I didn't. I drove back to Chicago without stopping. The next morning, the motion was granted. Ellison Hardware would be liquidated. Assets sold. Debts settled. Officers scrutinized. My father called me that afternoon. His voice sounded hollow. It's over, he said. Yes, I replied. They're going to lose everything, he said. They already did, I said gently. They just didn't know it yet. He didn't argue. I thought I was protecting the family, he whispered. You were protecting control, I replied. They're not the same, he sighed. I don't know who I am without it. I felt something soften in me. Not forgiveness. Understanding. You get to find out, I said. Like I did. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and opened a new document. I titled it Boundaries. I wrote one sentence. I am not responsible for outcomes created by my exclusion. I saved it. That night, I slept deeply. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time in my life, the consequences weren't mine to carry. Liquidation doesn't happen all at once. It happens in pieces. First, the inventory, then the equipment. Then, the name. Ellison Hardware became a line item in a court docket. A list of assets tagged with numbers instead of stories. Forklifts, shelving, office furniture. Even the old sign that used to hang above the entrance, the one my father insisted never be replaced because people recognize it. Recognition didn't protect it. I followed none of it directly. I didn't attend auctions. I didn't read local commentary. But things have a way of reaching you anyway. A former employee emailed to say goodbye. Another asked if I was hiring. Someone forwarded me a Facebook post from a cousin I barely remembered, accusing me of destroying a legacy. I deleted it. The only person I continued to hear from consistently was Bethany. Her messages became shorter, less defensive, more factual. Lucas moved out. Dad's not sleeping. Mom sold her jewelry. I didn't reply to most of them. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Distance was the only way to stop the emotional bleed. Then, one afternoon, Denise called with something unexpected. The trustee wants to close the loop, she said. He's asking if you're willing to submit a final statement for the record. What kind of statement? I asked. Not public, she said. Just your position. In your own words. It becomes part of the file. I thought about it. What's the purpose? I asked. To clarify intent, she replied. Especially since your family framed this as retaliatory. I exhaled slowly. Send me the parameters, I said. That evening, I sat at my desk and wrote. Not a defense, not an explanation. A record. I stated the facts plainly. That I was excluded from estate decisions without disclosure. That ownership of the land transferred to me legally. That enforcement followed standard procedure. That I declined to misrepresent or conceal facts to preserve appearances. I ended with one sentence. My actions were not punitive. They were corrective. I sent it to Denise and closed the laptop. 2 days later, Lucas was removed as an officer of the company. The notice didn't mention me, but I knew. Bethany called that night. He's blaming you, she said quietly. Says you waited for the perfect moment. I stared out the window. I waited to be left alone. She was quiet. He says you never cared about the family, she continued. I turned back to the phone. Did he ever ask? She didn't answer. Instead, she said, I don't know how to talk to him anymore. I chose my words carefully. You don't have to, I said. Silence is also information. A week later, my mother asked to see me, not to negotiate, not to plead, to talk. We met at a small park near the old house. Neutral ground again. The trees were bare. Winter was coming. She looked older, smaller. The confidence she used to wear like perfume was gone. I've been thinking, she said after a long pause. I waited. I thought love meant keeping things smooth, she said, avoiding conflict, making decisions quietly. I nodded. That's what you did. She winced. I thought you didn't mind, she said. You were always so self-sufficient. That wasn't comfort, I said. That was adaptation. She looked down at her hands. I see that now. I didn't respond. I didn't reassure her. Insight didn't undo impact. I wanted Bethany to be safe, she continued. I thought if things were clear for her, it would be easier. And I was the complication, I said. She swallowed. Yes. The honesty surprised me. I didn't think you'd fight back, she added. I didn't, I said. I stepped aside. She looked at me, confused. I stopped absorbing consequences that weren't mine, I clarified. She nodded slowly. I don't know how to be your mother now, she said. That's not my job to solve, I replied gently. We sat in silence after that. When we stood to leave, she touched my arm. I'm sorry, she said, for not choosing you when it mattered. I met her eyes. You chose, I said. That's why this happened. I left before she could respond. That night, Denise emailed me one final update. The trustee has closed review. No further action required on your part. I read it twice. No further action. For years, my role had been maintenance. Smoothing, explaining, waiting. Now, there was nothing left to manage. The next morning, I received the deed confirmation for the finalized development. The logistics firm had already broken ground. I watched from a distance as trucks moved in, as structure replaced stagnation, as the land did what land is supposed to do when it's respected. I didn't feel proud. I felt aligned, and that was new. Because alignment doesn't ask you to disappear. It asks you to stand where you are and let the truth hold. The silence afterward was louder than the fallout. When everything collapses, people expect noise, arguments, courtrooms, final speeches. But what I got instead was absence. No more calls asking me to fix things. No more passive-aggressive updates. No more invitations framed like obligations. Just quiet. At first, it felt unfamiliar. Then, it felt expensive. I hadn't realized how much mental space my family occupied until they were gone from it. How many decisions I filtered through their reactions. How often I measured my choices against what would be easiest for them to accept. Without that weight, my days changed shape. I stopped rushing in the mornings. I cooked again, real meals. I started taking longer walks, not to clear my head, but because I wanted to be outside. I slept through the night, and still, there were moments. A song in a grocery store, a brand name on a truck, a memory that showed up uninvited. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was repetitive. One Tuesday afternoon, I received a certified envelope. No return address. Court seal. Inside was a formal notice. Lucas was being pursued for breach of fiduciary duty. Civil, not criminal, but serious. The document outlined misrepresentations, conflicts of interest, personal guarantees signed without authority. I read it once. Then I put it back in the envelope. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt finished. Bethany called 2 days later. Her voice sounded different, steadier, older. I moved out, she said. Where? I asked. A friend's place, for now. She paused. I couldn't stay there anymore. Everything felt like a courtroom. I understood that feeling. Dad barely talks, she continued. Mom keeps trying to fix things that don't exist anymore. I stayed quiet. I wanted to ask you something, she said. Yes? Were you always planning this? She asked. Or did it just happen? I thought about it. No, I said. I planned to survive. The rest followed. She let out a breath. I used to think you were detached, she said. but I think you were just ahead of us." I didn't correct her. "I don't know what we're going to be now," she said. "That's not something you inherit," I replied. "You get to choose it." After we hung up, I sat with that for a long time. Choice had always been the thing I wasn't allowed. Now it was the only thing that mattered. That weekend, I visited my grandmother's grave, not out of obligation, out of curiosity. I wanted to know what it felt like to stand there without resentment. The headstone was simple. Her name, dates, no embellishment. I knelt and brushed leaves away from the base. "You knew," I said quietly. "Didn't you?" I didn't expect an answer, but I felt something settle. She hadn't protected me in life, but she had given me leverage in death. Not as a gift, as a correction. It was the most honest thing anyone in that family had ever done. On Monday, I signed the final development paperwork. No ceremony, no witnesses beyond a notary who didn't care who I was. As I handed the pen back, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. Revenge requires obsession. It requires watching the other person suffer. This was release. I didn't attend the liquidation sale. I didn't watch the company name disappear. I didn't follow Lucas's case. I had stepped out of the narrative entirely. A month later, my mother sent one last message. "I don't expect forgiveness," it read, "but I hope someday we can talk again." I stared at the screen. Then I typed back one sentence. "I'm open to contact when it's not about repair." She didn't reply, and that was fine, because repair implies something is broken. I wasn't. I had simply stopped bending. That winter, I spent Christmas alone. No tree, no forced cheer, just a quiet dinner and a long walk through the city, while other people rushed between obligations. It was the first holiday I didn't feel braced for impact. As the year closed, I wrote one final note in the document I'd started months earlier. Boundaries. This time, more than one sentence. I am allowed to be whole, even if others preferred me fragmented. I am not required to shrink to preserve tradition. Love that demands silence is not love. Control dressed as concern is still control. And choosing myself is not abandonment. I closed the file. The story didn't end with applause or reconciliation. It ended with stability, with sleep, with a life that no longer needed permission. The first sign that my life had truly changed came in a way I didn't expect. Nothing dramatic happened. No phone call, no letter, no apology. What changed was that I stopped checking. I stopped checking my phone for messages from numbers I already knew by heart. I stopped scanning headlines for familiar names. I stopped wondering how they were explaining everything to other people. The story no longer required my supervision. That realization came one morning as I was standing in the kitchen of my new place, coffee cooling in my mug, sunlight cutting across the floor in a way that still felt unreal. The house wasn't extravagant, not a mansion, not a statement, just solid, quiet, mine. I had chosen it myself. No compromises, no explanations. For most of my life, every choice I made had been negotiated in advance. Not openly, but invisibly. What would make things smoother? What would keep the peace? What would avoid that familiar tightening in the room? Now, there was no room to manage. I thought that would feel lonely. It didn't. It felt clean. Work settled into a steady rhythm. The development progressed without surprises. Contracts were honored, boundaries respected. When issues arose, they were handled directly, without family dynamics distorting the process. That alone felt revolutionary. One afternoon, I ran into Alan Whitaker again, the trustee. Pure coincidence. We were both waiting for coffee at the same place downtown. He recognized me first. "Ms. Ellison," he said, nodding politely. "Mr. Whitaker," I replied. He hesitated, then said, "For what it's worth, I've been doing this a long time." Families rarely understand the difference between being wronged and being corrected. I considered that. Correction feels personal when people are used to control, I said. He smiled slightly. Exactly. We parted ways. No follow-up. No lingering connection. Just another chapter closed properly. Bethany reached out once more in early spring. Not with news. Not with guilt. With an update. "I'm starting over," she wrote. "New job. New apartment. Therapy. I don't know where things will land, but I wanted you to know I see it now. I see what you were carrying. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, I'm glad you're choosing yourself. That was all. I didn't offer advice. I didn't reopen the door. Support doesn't require access. My parents never contacted me again. I heard through distant channels that my father downsized, that my mother volunteered at church more, that Lucas was fighting his case quietly, no longer loudly confident. None of that reached me directly, and that mattered, because distance wasn't punishment. It was alignment. The longer I lived this way, the more clearly I could see the pattern that had shaped my entire adulthood. I hadn't been excluded because I was weak. I had been excluded because I was inconvenient. I asked questions. I noticed inconsistencies. I didn't perform gratitude for things that came with strings attached. In families like mine, that makes you dangerous. So they called it independence, coldness, disinterest, anything but clarity. I used to think love meant endurance, staying, absorbing, adjusting. Now I understand that love, real love, doesn't require you to disappear to function. It doesn't demand silence as proof of loyalty. It doesn't confuse obedience with care. The moment I stopped trying to earn my place, I realized something sharper and far more freeing. I had always belonged to myself. Everything else had been negotiation. On the anniversary of the court ruling, I went back to the park where my mother and I had last spoken. Same bench, same bare trees, now full again. I didn't go there for closure. I went there to measure distance, and I smiled, because the ache was gone. In its place was something quieter, heavier, stronger, dignity. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. You don't lose your family when you set boundaries. You lose the illusion that love should cost you your voice. The moment you stop managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own, everything shifts. Not loudly, not immediately, but permanently. If you're listening to this and something in it feels uncomfortably familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not cruel for stepping back. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not wrong for choosing clarity over chaos. And you do not owe anyone access to you just because they share your blood. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight. It's to stop explaining. That's where peace begins. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived through family drama, betrayal, exclusion, or the quiet kind of injustice that never gets named, you're not alone. Feel free to leave a comment and share your experience. Like this story if it helped you put words to something you've been carrying. And subscribe for more stories about boundaries, karma, and what happens when the tables finally turn. Thank you for listening.